Hey everyone, and welcome to The Vault, our little video series where we share and talk briefly about little tidbits Tekken has to offer. First, I apologize that there hasn't been a basics guide for a while. I've been streaming more lately and just been a bit busier with other stuff, but I did finish the written guide for Leroy today, so at the latest, the first video of that will be up this weekend. In the meantime, I didn't have time to stream this week, so I wanted to do at least one video, although we will have a stream tomorrow night, so be on the lookout for that. But for this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's kind of controversial, a little bit, but comes up a lot, and that is how do we define reactable? So I've touched on this a little bit in previous videos, but I want to go more in depth here. So this is a big topic because there's no one right answer. And as you can see, I'm not even going to start with the actual game. Instead, I want to talk about the numbers because a lot of players, even high level players, get stuck on the numbers and what they mean. So first, when I type in average human reaction time, which I've already done, the result Google gives me from the first article that it finds is that the average reaction time to visual stimulus is 0.25 seconds. If we whip out our handy dandy calculator, we can figure the frames, which are 15. But if we scroll down a little bit, here, 1 second, and look at this next link, this is a site where, sorry, let me pull it up there. This is a site where people can actually go on and take the test, take a test themselves. There are a couple interesting things with this. So first, the average time that they have, you'll notice, is different. So they have 284 milliseconds. And if you're curious, one frame is 16.67 milliseconds. So again, if we do the math, divide 284 times, or divided by 16.67, we get a little bit over 17 frames. So even if we use the median though, which is 273, and we use our frame time, that's still a little over 16 frames. So the point is, the reason that I'm showing this is that there's a lot of variability here. So reaction time changes a lot from person to person and group to group. But what I find interesting here with this site in particular is how they talk about how the average has gone up over time. And they identify a few likely technological reasons for that, which just furthers the point that the kind of equipment that you use is really, really important. So what does this mean for our conversation? So first, it means that there's no definitive number on what is reactable. Not only will the average time change from person to person, but your reaction time is going to be within a range. It's not always going to be 15 or 16 frames or whatever. It's going to change from situation to situation. Second, these times are based on laboratory or lab-like conditions. Even the people that are taking these tests like this one at their computer, they're responding to very, very simple stimuli. They're just waiting for a flash or whatever, and then they have a simple response of tapping a screen or clicking a mouse or what have you. That is much different from having to react to something that may or may not happen, all while you're under pressure. So consider the classic example of grabs. You know, it's basically a mantra among Tekken players at this point to say that you can't break them all. If you're in practice mode, sure, maybe you actually can. But once the pressure is dialed up in a match, you know, no way. There are going to be some that will get through. Now, none of that helps us in figuring out what's reactable, right? So the question I really want to ask with this video is that if we have this variability, how do we figure it out? How do we figure out what is reactable? In that regard, I want to offer a couple of guideline suggestions to you. And for that, we'll have to pull up the game. The first thing we should look at is consensus. If enough people say something is reactable and they can demonstrate a high percentage of success, then it's safe for us to conclude that the thing is reactable. A good example of this is Brian's down forward 3. This move has nearly a 30 frame startup. Once you hit a certain level of skill, you rarely see this hit. It will get blocked far more than it hits. That's not to say it's not useful. It's a homing move and it high crushes, so you can sneak it in, but most players will react to this far more often than not. And most people will tell you that this is true. So with that, we can pretty comfortably conclude that 30 frames is reactable. You'll find a similar opinion regarding Law's down back 4, which has a 26 frame startup. So we can kind of bump that down a little bit to 26 frames as being safely reactable. But if we go to Jack and look at his debugger, this is where opinions start to split and leads us to our second guideline, which is animation. Debugger is I-24, so only a couple frames faster than Law's down back 4, but if you ask players with Jack experience, they'll tell you that you can hide it just enough that the opponent can't see it until it's too late. How do we hide a move? Well, first, if this startup is subtle enough, we can hide a move simply by being on a certain side. In this instance, Debugger is a left-handed move, so if we are on one P side, his left arm can be a bit obfuscated. You're going to notice motion, right? But trying to distinguish that it's his left arm in particular that's moving, that's a bit tougher. Now, moreover, the beginning of Debugger can look like a couple different things, the most common thing being his big uppercut, which is roughly the same speed. Now, this leads me to one of my favorite controversial examples. Now, first I need to remind everyone that most people consider Craig's quarter circle forward 2 to be unreactable, and it's I-24. So it's still a slower move, of course, because there's a lot of moves faster in I-24, but most still consider it to be unreactable. Now, part of that is because it's a little ambiguous, but I just want to establish that before we go on to the real example. The real example is Yoshi's unblockable sweep. This example demonstrates perfectly how you also need to consider system mechanics, which is our next guideline. The sweep itself is I-25, and it's not really all that ambiguous because the unblockable spark happens in the first couple frames of the move. So strictly speaking, your brain can certainly see it, and certainly you can hit a button before that move hits you. However, it's a low and you cannot block or parry it. Your best chance to beat it is to low crush it, which includes jumping. At minimum, it takes 6 frames for you to get airborne in most of your common crushes, which means that instead of the full 25 frames, you need to react to it in 19 frames. And the unblockable spark, by the way, doesn't always happen on the first frame of the move. And from what I understand, there are ways to do the move a frame or two faster. Although don't quote me on that, I'm not a Yoshi player. Regardless, the point is that at best, you have 19 frames to react to it. If you think you're reacting, in all likelihood, you're simply reacting to the Yoshi player going into full crouch, which he needs to do to execute the move. So go watch iMusician. He hits a lot of good players with this all the time, and not just from Oki setups. But if you did a survey of players, a lot of them would tell you that this is absolutely reactable. In my opinion, I think people are just tricking themselves into thinking that that's possible. I don't think people recognize that you can't take advantage of the full 25 frame startup. So I certainly believe that people are seeing it before it hits them, but by then, it's too late. Now again, to further complicate this whole thing, there are exceptions. Negan's stance has an automatic low reversal and it's instant. So if you're a Negan player and you train yourself to do 3+4 when you see the spark, then you actually have a good chance of reacting to it consistently. Leroy is another character that can do the same thing. But it just goes to show that there's no number we can consistently rely on. And I suppose that could be our last guideline. Recognize that in the heat of the match, when the pressure is building, your brain has to juggle a bunch of things at once, so something can absolutely slip through. And if the move is in that gray area where maybe you can react to it under optimal conditions, that pressure is going to change the formula. But that's enough babble for me. I hope I gave you guys something to consider. If you take one thing away, just keep in mind that there are a lot of things to factor into a topic like this, so you're not going to find one right answer. So with that, gonna call it the end of the video. As mentioned before, we're streaming tomorrow night with some competitive sets. We're doing a little online thing with our local crew. I already uploaded round 1 to YouTube, so you can go check that out. Otherwise, like the video, subscribe, go follow us on Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, links are below, etc., etc. Consider also supporting us on Patreon. That support goes a long way. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay safe.